I was staring at the twisted metal post and shattered wooden pieces scattered across my snow-covered lawn when I heard the voice that would haunt my next 3 months. "Mr. Reynolds, you are in violation of HOA Code Section 12.4, Barbara Henderson announced from behind me, her nasal tone cutting through the frigid February morning air like a blade. Damaged or destroyed mailboxes must be replaced within 72 hours, and I expect you to have this eyesore cleaned up by end of business today." I turned around slowly, my breath forming clouds in the 17-degree Wisconsin morning. Barbara stood there in her puffy beige coat, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, her thin lips pressed into that familiar expression of manufactured superiority I had come to know too well since moving to Meadowbrook Estates in Green Bay 6 months ago. "Barbara, your plow just hit my mailbox 20 minutes ago," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "I watched the whole thing happen from my kitchen window. The driver took the corner too wide and clipped it straight on." Her eyes narrowed behind her rectangular glasses. "That is a baseless accusation, Mr. Reynolds. The HOA contracted plow service has been operating in this neighborhood for 8 years without incident. Clearly, your mailbox was improperly installed too close to the road, which violates Code Section 12.2. You will be receiving a fine for that as well." "Too close to the road." I felt my jaw clench. "It's in the exact same spot as every other mailbox on this street." "The driver was going too fast and cut the corner." "I will thank you not to raise your voice at me," Barbara said, her tone dripping with condescension. "The HOA takes safety very seriously, and making false claims about our service providers is a serious matter. I suggest you focus on compliance rather than deflection." Before I could respond, a door opened 3 houses down. My neighbor, Frank Morrison, walked across his front yard toward us, still wearing his bathrobe and slippers. He was a retired postal worker in his 70s, with a no-nonsense attitude I had always appreciated. "Barbara, I saw the whole thing," Frank called out. "I was getting my coffee and watched that plow truck swing wide around the corner. Hit Brian's mailbox dead on and kept driving like nothing happened." Barbara's face tightened. "Mr. Morrison, I hardly think peering out your window makes you a reliable witness." "I was standing on my front porch," Frank corrected, stopping beside me, "had a clear view of the entire street." "Your driver was speeding, took the turn too sharp, and demolished this mailbox. I even got a partial plate number before he disappeared around the next block." "Convenient," Barbara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I suppose you also have video evidence." "Actually," a woman's voice came from across the street, "I do." Jennifer Walsh, a software engineer who worked from home, walked over holding her phone. She was in her mid-30s, usually quiet and kept to herself, but I had exchanged pleasantries with her at the mailbox several times. "My Ring doorbell caught the whole incident," Jennifer said, tapping her phone screen. "Would you like to see it, Barbara?" I watched Barbara's expression shift from smug certainty to barely concealed irritation. "That will not be necessary." However, Ring doorbell footage is notoriously unreliable and has poor angle coverage. The facts remain that Mr. Reynolds' mailbox is destroyed and needs immediate replacement. "The facts," Frank said sharply, "are that the HOA is responsible for the damage and should be paying for a new mailbox." Barbara straightened her shoulders. "The HOA accepts no liability for this incident. Mr. Reynolds has 72 hours to comply, or the fines will begin accumulating at $50 per day. Good morning, gentlemen, Miss Walsh." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her silver Lexus SUV parked at the corner. I stood there, stunned at the blatant dismissal of evidence and witnesses. "Unbelievable," Jennifer muttered. "Want me to email you the video file, Brian, please?" I said. "And thank you both for speaking up. I honestly thought I was going to be fighting this alone." "Barbara has been a tyrant for years," Frank said, shaking his head. "She became HOA president 4 years ago and has been making everyone's lives miserable ever since, but this is a new low, even for her." The video footage was crystal clear. Jennifer sent it to my email within 10 minutes, and I watched it 3 times on my laptop. The timestamp showed 8:17 that morning. The large white plow truck with Clearway Snow Services painted on the door came around the corner at what looked like at least 30 miles per hour, way too fast for a residential street. The driver, visible through the windshield, appeared to be looking down at something, maybe his phone. As the truck swung wide on the turn, the plow blade extended at least 2 feet into the shoulder area where my mailbox stood. The impact sent pieces of wood and metal flying, and the post snapped clean off at the base. The truck never even slowed down. I saved the file to 3 different locations and made a backup on a flash drive. Then I called my homeowner's insurance. "Mr. Reynolds, if the HOA contracted service caused the damage, this would fall under their liability insurance, not yours," the agent explained. "Filing a claim on your policy would count against you and likely raise your premiums. I'd recommend pursuing this through the HOA first. And if they refuse to take responsibility, then you would need to pursue legal action against them or their contractor. Small claims court, most likely, given the replacement cost of a mailbox." I thanked her and hung up, already knowing what Barbara's response would be. Sure enough, when I emailed her the video footage with a polite request for the HOA to cover the replacement cost, I received a reply within an hour. "Mr. Reynolds, as I stated this morning, the HOA accepts no liability for your mailbox damage. The video you have provided does not clearly show causation, and your mailbox appears to have been improperly positioned. You have 68 hours remaining to achieve compliance. Regards, Barbara Henderson, HOA President." I read the email twice, feeling my blood pressure rising with each word. The video absolutely showed causation. Anyone with functioning eyes could see the plow blade striking my mailbox. This was not about evidence or facts. This was about Barbara refusing to admit the HOA made a mistake because it would cost them money and make her look bad. I forwarded the email to Frank and Jennifer along with the video file. Jennifer responded first. "This is insane. The video is completely clear. What are you going to do?" Frank's response came a minute later. "Barbara is banking on you not wanting to fight this. She pulls this kind of thing all the time. Someone needs to stand up to her." He was right, I realized. This was not just about a mailbox anymore. This was about an HOA president who had become so drunk on her tiny amount of power that she thought she could ignore reality and bully homeowners into submission. I spent the next hour researching Wisconsin HOA laws and small claims court procedures. The mailbox itself would cost about $250 to replace with a nice one similar to what I had. The installation would be another $100 if I hired someone, though I could probably do it myself. But the principle of the matter was worth far more than $350. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Frank standing there with another man I recognized as Tom Chen, who lived 2 doors down from Frank. "Brian, this is Tom," Frank said. "Tell him what you told me." Tom, a high school math teacher in his 40s, looked uncomfortable but determined. "I was in my garage with the door open when the plow came through this morning. I heard the impact and looked out in time to see your mailbox post falling and the truck driving away. I did not see the actual moment of impact, but I definitely heard it and saw the immediate aftermath. That makes 3 witnesses, Frank said with satisfaction. 4 if you count yourself watching from inside. 3 independent witnesses, I corrected. I'm the affected party, so my testimony carries less weight legally. But 3 neighbors who have nothing to gain from lying. That's solid. Tom shifted his weight. I know Barbara is going to make this difficult, but I'm willing to provide a written statement if you need it. She's been harassing my wife about our garden decorations for months, claiming they violate some obscure code. I'm tired of her acting like she owns the whole neighborhood. Over the next 2 days, I worked on replacing the mailbox myself. I had to dig out the frozen ground where the old post had been, which was brutal work in February in Wisconsin. My hands were numb despite thick gloves, and the task that would have taken an hour in summer took nearly 4 hours in the frozen earth. I installed a new pressure-treated post, mounted a nice black mailbox with brushed nickel accents, and made absolutely certain it was positioned at the exact same distance from the road as my neighbor's boxes. I even measured multiple mailboxes on the street and took photographs showing they were all positioned identically. The total cost came to $312 for materials. I kept every receipt. On the morning of the 3rd day, exactly 71 hours after the incident, I received another email from Barbara. Mr. Reynolds, I am pleased to see you have achieved compliance with HOA regulations regarding mailbox replacement. However, upon inspection this morning, I have determined that your new mailbox is not consistent with the approved aesthetic guidelines for Meadowbrook Estates. The black color is acceptable, but the brushed nickel accents are not. Approved finishes are brass or oil-rubbed bronze only. You have 30 days to bring your mailbox into compliance or face fines of $25 per day. Additionally, you are hereby fined $300 for the violation of having your previous mailbox positioned too close to the roadway, which created a hazard. Payment is due within 15 days. I sat back in my chair, staring at my computer screen in disbelief. She was doubling down. Not only was she refusing to take responsibility for the damage, but now she was fining me for it and inventing new violations. I pulled out my HOA covenant documents, which I had reviewed when purchasing the house. I flipped through the sections on mailboxes and aesthetic standards. Section 12 covered mailboxes extensively, including size, height, and placement requirements. There was a subsection on colors, which specified that neutral colors including black, white, gray, or natural wood finishes were acceptable. Hardware and accents were mentioned in exactly one sentence. Hardware and decorative accents should be of appropriate quality and finish. That was it. No specific requirement for brass or oil-rubbed bronze. Barbara had made that up. As for the fine for improper positioning, the covenant specified that mailboxes should be placed at the property line or within 12 inches thereof. I went outside with a tape measure and verified what I already knew. My old mailbox had been positioned exactly 8 inches from the property line, well within the specified range. I measured my neighbor's mailboxes, 6 inches, 10 inches, 7 inches, 11 inches, all within the range. I took photographs of each measurement, including close-ups of the tape measure against the property line markers. I compiled everything into a detailed response email. The video evidence, written statements from 3 witnesses, measurements proving my mailbox positioning was correct, photographs showing identical positioning of neighbors' mailboxes, and the actual covenant language regarding finishes showing no specific requirement for brass or bronze. I sent it to Barbara with a clear message that I would not be paying any fines and expected the HOA to reimburse me for the mailbox replacement cost. Her response came back in under 30 minutes. "Mr. Reynolds, your confrontational attitude is noted. The HOA board will be reviewing your case at our next monthly meeting on February 28th. In the meantime, the fines stand and your account is considered delinquent. Continued refusal to pay will result in a lien being placed on your property. I suggest you reconsider your approach." February 28th was 3 weeks away. I felt my jaw tighten as I realized this was Barbara's strategy. Drag everything out, pile on fines and threats, and hope I would cave under pressure rather than fight. I called Frank and filled him in on the latest developments. She threatened a lien. Frank said, his voice rising. "Over a mailbox. Brian, you need to talk to a lawyer. This is getting out of hand." "I know," I said. "But lawyers are expensive and this is still a relatively small amount of money. I'm going to try the board meeting first." "Maybe the other board members are reasonable," Frank snorted. "Good luck with that." Barbara stacked the board with her friends. There's her, Deborah Winters and Linda Carmichael. They're like the three witches from Macbeth, except with worse fashion sense and more clipboards. Despite the situation, I had to laugh. "You know Macbeth?" "I wasn't always a mailman," Frank said with warmth in his voice. "I went to college, majored in English before deciding I preferred a steady paycheck and fresh air. The point is, those three operate as a unit. They vote together on everything, and they control the HOA like their personal fiefdom." "What about the other homeowners? Doesn't anyone challenge them?" "People have tried over the years. Barbara is very good at wearing people down. She uses the rules as weapons, buries people in paperwork and fines until they either give up or move away. The last person who really stood up to her was a guy named Marcus Shaw. He fought them for almost a year over a fence dispute. Eventually, he just sold his house and left. Said it was not worth the stress." "That's what she's counting on with me," I said slowly, the realization settling over me. "She thinks I'll just pay up or leave rather than keep fighting." "Probably," Frank agreed. "Are you planning to prove her wrong?" I thought about it for a long moment. I had moved to Green Bay for a fresh start after my divorce. The house in Meadowbrook Estates had seemed perfect. Good price, nice neighborhood, close to my job as an industrial equipment sales manager. I had no intention of letting Barbara Henderson run me out of my own home over her ego and power trip. "Yeah," I said. "I am. Over the next 2 weeks, I did my homework. I researched Wisconsin HOA law extensively, learning about homeowner rights, HOA limitations, and proper procedures for disputes. I discovered that HOAs in Wisconsin had to follow their own bylaws strictly, and any deviation could invalidate their actions. I also learned that HOAs could not place liens on properties without going through specific legal procedures, and they certainly could not do it over disputed fines. I requested copies of the HOA's bylaws, meeting minutes for the past year, and financial statements. According to Wisconsin statute, homeowners had the right to review these documents. Barbara responded that I could review them at her home by appointment only, between the hours of 1 and 3 on weekday afternoons. Since I worked full-time, those hours were clearly designed to be inconvenient. I responded that state law allowed homeowners to request copies at reasonable costs, and I was formally requesting copies be mailed or emailed to me. I cited the specific statute. Barbara replied that the HOA would provide copies for a fee of $1 per page for printing and handling. "How many pages are we talking about?" I emailed back. approximately 470 pages for the requested documents. $470 for documents I had a legal right to review. This was another stalling tactic, another attempt to make fighting back more expensive and difficult than just giving in. I contacted the Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions, which oversaw HOA regulations. After explaining the situation, a helpful woman named Sarah gave me some valuable information. An HOA cannot charge unreasonable fees for document production, she explained. $1 per page for standard documents is excessive. Reasonable fees are typically 10 to 25 cents per page for black and white copies. If they're providing electronic copies, there should be no per-page fee at all, possibly a small flat administrative fee. What can I do if they refuse? You can file a complaint with our office. We'll investigate and can order them to provide the documents at reasonable cost. However, that process takes time, usually 4 to 6 weeks. The board meeting was in less than a week. I did not have 4 to 6 weeks. Is there another option? You could attend the HOA board meeting and request to review the documents there. They have to make them available to homeowners, and they cannot deny you access during an official meeting. I thanked her and hung up feeling slightly better armed for what was coming. The night before the board meeting, Jennifer knocked on my door. She was holding a manila folder and looked determined. I enhanced the video footage, she said without preamble. I work with video analytics software for my job, so I cleaned up the resolution and zoomed in on some key frames. You can clearly see the plow blade making contact with your mailbox, and I got a clean shot of the truck's license plate. She opened the folder and showed me several printed still images. The quality was remarkable. One image showed the plow blade within inches of my mailbox. The next showed the impact with the post visibly bending. The third showed the mailbox structure breaking apart. The license plate was crystal clear in another shot. Jennifer, this is incredible, I said, looking through the images. Thank you. Barbara came by my house yesterday, Jennifer said, her expression darkening. She told me that providing false evidence in an HOA dispute could result in fines and possible legal action against me. She was trying to intimidate me into backing down. I'm sorry, I said. I never meant to drag you and the others into this. Don't be sorry. I'm not backing down. I have the original footage time-stamped and backed up in 3 locations, including cloud storage. The enhanced versions are all properly documented, showing chain of custody. I know what I'm doing, and Barbara doesn't scare me. Frank stopped by an hour later with Tom. They both had typed statements detailing what they witnessed, dated and signed. We're coming to the board meeting tomorrow night, Frank announced. Tom and I already talked about it. You're going to need support, and Barbara needs to see that this is not just you she's pushing around. The board meeting was held at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse, a small building at the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates that was usually used for neighborhood events. When I arrived at 6:50, there were already about 15 people in the room, which surprised me. I had expected it to be just me against the board. Frank was there with his wife, Margaret. Tom had come with his wife, Rachel. Jennifer was sitting near the front. I recognized several other neighbors whose names I did not know yet, but I had seen them around the neighborhood. Barbara sat at a table at the front of the room with 2 other women. One was in her 60s with dyed red hair and too much makeup, wearing a bright purple pantsuit. The other was younger, maybe early 50s, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun and the pinched expression of someone who enjoyed saying no. These had to be Deborah and Linda. At exactly 7, Barbara called the meeting to order by hitting a small gavel on the table. I had not realized HOAs actually used gavels. It seemed absurdly pompous. "Good evening, everyone," Barbara said in her nasally voice. "We have quite a crowd tonight. Let's proceed with our agenda. First item, approval of last month's minutes." "Second," said the redhead, who I assumed was Deborah. "Third," added the blonde, presumably Linda. "All in favor," Barbara said. 3 hands went up instantly. Motion passes. Next item, financial report. This went on for 20 minutes. Every mundane detail of HOA business was discussed in excruciating detail. Landscaping contracts, parking permit renewals, plans for the summer block party. It was all clearly designed to bore everyone into leaving before getting to the actual controversial items. Finally, Barbara looked up from her papers with a tight smile. "Now we come to new business. Mr. Brian Reynolds has requested time to address the board regarding a dispute over mailbox violations and associated fines." I stood up, my folder of evidence in hand. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak. On February 15th at approximately 8:17 a.m., my mailbox was struck and destroyed by the HOA's contracted snow plow service. I witnessed this from my window, and 3 of my neighbors also witnessed the incident. I have video evidence clearly showing the plow truck striking my mailbox. I walked forward and set Jennifer's enhanced images on the table in front of the board. These are still frames from Ring doorbell footage captured by Jennifer Walsh. You can clearly see the plow blade making contact with the mailbox and the resulting destruction. Barbara barely glanced at the images. "Mr. Reynolds, we have already discussed this. The HOA is not liable for your improperly positioned mailbox." "My mailbox was positioned 8 inches from the property line," I said, keeping my voice level. "Your own covenant specifies that mailboxes should be within 12 inches of the property line. I have measurements and photographs of multiple mailboxes on the street, all positioned similarly. My mailbox was in full compliance with HOA regulations." I placed another set of photos on the table showing the measurements. "Furthermore, you find me for having a mailbox with brushed nickel accents, claiming only brass or oil-rubbed bronze are acceptable. However, the actual covenant language only specifies that hardware and accents should be of appropriate quality and finish. There is no specific requirement for brass or bronze." I placed a copy of the relevant covenant section on the table, with the exact language highlighted. Barbara's face was turning red. "Mr. Reynolds, you are not a lawyer, and your interpretation of HOA regulations is incorrect. The board has determined that your mailbox was in violation, and the fines stand." "Then I'm requesting the board show me the specific regulation I violated," I said. "I've reviewed the covenants thoroughly, and I cannot find any language supporting your claims." "The board's interpretation of the covenants is final," Linda spoke up for the first time, her voice sharp. "Homeowners do not get to decide what the rules mean." "But the board has to follow the actual rules as written," I countered. "You cannot just make up violations that don't exist in the covenant." "Are you calling us liars?" Deborah demanded, her face flushing to match her red hair. "I'm saying the evidence clearly shows the HOA plow truck destroyed my mailbox, and the HOA should take responsibility for that damage," I said firmly. "I'm also saying that the fines you've issued are not supported by the actual covenant language. I'm requesting the board reverse these fines and reimburse me the $312 I spent replacing the mailbox." "Request denied," Barbara said immediately. "The fines stand, and if you do not pay within the specified timeline, we will proceed with placing a lien on your property." "You cannot legally place a lien without going through proper procedures," I said. "Wisconsin statute requires specific steps including formal notice and opportunity to cure. You've done neither. Barbara's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you threatening legal action against this board? I'm informing you of your legal obligations, I said. If you proceed with an improper lien, then yes, I will have to pursue legal remedies. This is outrageous, Linda burst out. We volunteer our time to run this HOA and keep this neighborhood nice, and this is the thanks we get. Threats and accusations. I appreciate the volunteer work, I said, trying to keep my tone respectful. But that doesn't give the board the right to ignore evidence or enforce rules that don't exist. Frank stood up from his seat. I'd like to speak if that's allowed. Barbara looked like she wanted to refuse, but could not find a procedural reason. Make it brief, Mr. Morrison. I witnessed the plow truck hit Brian's mailbox, Frank said clearly. I was standing on my porch and saw the whole thing. The truck was going too fast and took the corner wide. The driver hit the mailbox and kept going. This isn't Brian being difficult. This is the HOA refusing to admit a mistake. Thank you for your opinion, Mr. Morrison, Barbara said dismissively. However, you are not an accident reconstruction expert, and your casual observation is not definitive evidence. Jennifer stood up next. I have the video footage if anyone wants to see it. I can pull it up on my phone right now. It clearly shows exactly what happened. That will not be necessary, Barbara said quickly. The board has reviewed the available information and made its decision. You have not reviewed anything, I said, frustration creeping into my voice. You've dismissed every piece of evidence without even looking at it. Mr. Reynolds, this meeting is not a court of law, Barbara snapped. The board has made its determination. If you disagree, you are welcome to pursue whatever legal options you think are appropriate. However, I warn you that frivolous lawsuits can result in you being held liable for the HOA's legal fees. There's nothing frivolous about this, I said. You damaged my property and are now trying to extort money from me to cover up your contractor's mistake. The room went silent. Deborah gasped. Linda's mouth fell open. Barbara went very still, her face turning from red to white. That is slander, Barbara said, her voice dangerously quiet. You have just slandered this board in a public meeting. It's only slander if it's false, Frank called out from his seat. Several people in the audience laughed, which clearly infuriated Barbara even more. This meeting is adjourned, Barbara said, hitting her gavel so hard I thought it might break. Mr. Reynolds, you will be hearing from our attorney. She gathered her papers and stormed out, followed by Deborah and Linda. I stood there holding my folder of unused evidence, feeling like I had just made everything worse. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to shake my hand or offer words of support. About time someone stood up to her, one older woman said. She fined us $200 for having the wrong shade of beige on our shutters, a young couple told me. We ended up just paying it because we couldn't afford to fight. She threatened to fine us for having a vegetable garden in our backyard, another man said. Our own backyard, where nobody can even see it from the street. By the time I left the clubhouse, I felt oddly heartened despite the disastrous meeting. I was not alone in being mistreated by Barbara and her board cronies. The difference was, I was not going to back down. The next morning, I received a certified letter from a law firm called Hutchins and Brock, located in downtown Green Bay. The letter was full of legal language, but the gist was clear. I had slandered the HOA board at a public meeting, and if I did not issue a written apology and pay all outstanding fines within 7 days, they would pursue legal action against me for defamation. Additionally, the letter stated that I owed the HOA $300 for the mailbox positioning violation, plus $50 for late payment, plus another $300 for damages to HOA reputation. $650 total, due in 7 days. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. This was escalating fast. I needed real legal help now. I called a law firm recommended by a coworker, and after explaining the situation to a paralegal, I got transferred to an attorney named David Park. "Let me make sure I understand," David said after I walked him through everything. "The HOA's contractor damaged your mailbox. You have video evidence and 3 witnesses, and the HOA is now threatening to sue you for defamation because you called them on it." "That's the situation," I confirmed. "And they're claiming you owe them $650 for various violations that don't appear to actually exist in the HOA covenants, correct?" David was quiet for a moment. "Okay, this is actually pretty straightforward. The HOA is almost certainly bluffing. Defamation cases are notoriously difficult to win, and you would have a strong defense based on truth. If you can prove they're making up violations, that's going to be a serious problem for them. What should I do? First, don't pay anything. Second, I'll draft a response to their attorney explaining that you have substantial evidence supporting your position and that you will vigorously defend against any legal action. Third, we're going to send our own demand letter requiring the HOA to pay for your mailbox damage. If they refuse, we file in small claims court." "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked, dreading the answer. "For what we need to do right now, probably around $800 to $1,000. If this goes to small claims court, maybe another $500. If they're stupid enough to actually sue you for defamation, then we're talking real money, but I'd be shocked if they went that far. Their attorney has to know they don't have a case." I thought about it. I was now looking at spending over $1,000 on legal fees over a $300 mailbox. But Frank's words echoed in my mind about people backing down and moving away because Barbara made their lives miserable. Someone had to stand up to her. "Let's do it," I said. David sent his letter 2 days later. It was beautifully written, laying out all the evidence in clear legal language, citing relevant Wisconsin statutes about HOA limitations and homeowner rights, and making it clear that I had no intention of paying fraudulent fines. It also included a formal demand for $312 to cover my mailbox replacement costs, with a deadline of 14 days. The response from Hutchins and Brock came back within a week. The tone was noticeably different from their first letter, less aggressive and more conciliatory. They stated that the HOA was willing to compromise by waiving all fines if I agreed to drop my demand for reimbursement. In other words, everyone walks away and pretends nothing happened. "That's a pretty standard negotiation move," David explained when I called him. "They're trying to make this go away without admitting fault or paying anything." "I don't want to compromise," I said. "They damaged my mailbox and then tried to bully me into paying for it. Why should I be the one who eats the cost?" "I'm not saying you should," David said. "I'm just explaining what they're trying to do. If you want to keep pushing, we file in small claims court." "Let's file." The small claims paperwork was filed on March 20th. The court date was set for April 25th, which was over a month away. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Estates got interesting. Barbara started driving past my house multiple times a day, slowing down to stare at my mailbox. I started documenting each drive-by with timestamps. After the 3rd day of this, I waved cheerfully at her. She sped off so fast her tires squealed. Then the violation notices started arriving. My lawn had brown patches from winter damage, which violated aesthetic standards. My garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was just for the hour between when I got home from work and when I brought them to the garage. My car was parked in my driveway with the front wheels slightly angled, which apparently violated the rule about vehicles being parked straight. Every single violation came with a $25 fine. I documented everything, took photographs with timestamps, and sent copies to David. "She's harassing you," he said bluntly. "This is going to look very bad for her in court. Keep documenting everything." Frank told me that Barbara had started showing up at neighborhood events and warning people about associating with me. "She told Margaret at book club that you were a troublemaker trying to destroy the HOA and that anyone who supported you would be closely watched for violations," Frank said, shaking his head. "Margaret told her where she could stick her clipboard." Jennifer reported that Barbara had sent her a formal notice requiring approval for her Ring doorbell, claiming it was an external modification that needed architectural review. "She's just mad because my camera caught her contractor screwing up," Jennifer said. "I already checked the covenants. There's nothing about doorbell cameras needing approval." Tom mentioned that Barbara had driven past his house 6 times in 2 days, and he received a notice that his garden decorations were under review. "My wife is ready to go to war," Tom said with a grim smile. "She spent 3 years cultivating those garden beds, and if Barbara thinks she's going to force us to tear them out, she has another thing coming." The small claims court hearing finally arrived on April 25th. I took the day off work and met David at the Brown County Courthouse at 8:30 in the morning. The hearing was scheduled for 9. Barbara showed up at 8:55 with the attorney from Hutchins and Brock, a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit who looked supremely bored with the whole proceeding. Deborah and Linda were there too, sitting in the gallery like moral support. Small claims court was informal compared to regular court. We sat at tables facing the judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Kowalski, who had a reputation for being no-nonsense and efficient. Judge Kowalski reviewed the paperwork quickly. "Mr. Reynolds, you're claiming the HOA owes you $312 for a damaged mailbox. The HOA denies liability and claims the mailbox was improperly positioned. Is that accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing up. "And you have evidence to support your claim?" "Yes, Your Honor. Video footage, witness statements, and measurements showing my mailbox was properly positioned according to HOA covenants." "Let's see it." I walked forward with my folder, now considerably thicker than it had been at the board meeting. I showed the judge Jennifer's enhanced video stills, Frank's written statement, Tom's written statement, my own account, the measurements proving proper mailbox positioning, and photos of other mailboxes positioned identically. Judge Kowalski studied everything carefully, particularly the video stills. "This footage clearly shows a plow truck striking the mailbox," she said. "Is this the HOA's contracted service?" "Yes, Your Honor," I confirmed. "The company is Clearway Snow Services. They've had the HOA contract for 8 years according to the HOA president." "And does the HOA dispute that this is their contractor's truck?" Barbara's attorney stood up. "Your Honor, we do not dispute that Clearway Snow Services is the HOA's contractor. However, we dispute that the truck was operated negligently or that the mailbox positioning was proper. The HOA's position is that the mailbox was too close to the roadway, which created an unavoidable obstacle. Except that every other mailbox on the street is positioned identically," Judge Kowalski said, looking at my photos. "Was Mr. Reynolds supposed to position his mailbox differently than his neighbors?" "The other mailboxes may also be in violation," the attorney said smoothly. "That doesn't excuse Mr. Reynolds's violation." "So the HOA is claiming that all the mailboxes in the neighborhood are improperly positioned?" Judge Kowalski asked, One eyebrow raised. Potentially, Your Honor. But the HOA only fined Mr. Reynolds, whose mailbox was destroyed. Not any of the other homeowners with identically positioned mailboxes. The attorney hesitated. The other mailboxes have not caused any incidents that we're aware of, because they have not been hit by plow trucks yet, Judge Kowalski said dryly. Mr. Reynolds, do you have anything else? Yes, Your Honor. After the incident, the HOA president issued multiple retaliatory fines for minor or non-existent violations. I have documentation of at least 7 different violation notices issued in the month following this dispute, many for things that were never enforced before. I handed over copies of all Barbara's violation notices, along with photos showing how trivial the supposed violations were. Judge Kowalski flipped through them, her expression growing increasingly stern. Brown patches on lawn from winter damage. Garbage cans visible for 1 hour. Car parked at a slight angle. Has the HOA always enforced these standards with this level of scrutiny? No, Your Honor, I said. Other homeowners have confirmed they've never seen this kind of enforcement. It only started after I refused to pay for the mailbox damage. Barbara's attorney looked uncomfortable now. Your Honor, the HOA has a duty to enforce its covenants consistently. Consistently, yes. Selectively, no. Judge Kowalski set down the papers and looked directly at Barbara. Madam, are you the HOA president? Barbara stood up. Yes, Your Honor. I've served as president for 4 years. Did you personally issue all these violation notices to Mr. Reynolds? Yes, Your Honor. The violations were legitimate. But you have not issued similar notices to other homeowners with brown patches on their lawns, garbage cans visible from the street, or vehicles parked slightly crooked. Barbara's face flushed. I have not personally inspected every property recently. But you've driven past Mr. Reynolds's property multiple times per day, according to his logs. It seems you've been very focused on his property specifically. I drive through the neighborhood regularly as part of my duties, Barbara said defensively. 3 to 5 times per day past one specific house. Judge Kowalski looked skeptical. That seems excessive. Barbara did not answer. Judge Kowalski turned back to the evidence in front of her. Here's what I see. The video evidence clearly shows the HOA's contractor striking the mailbox. The mailbox was positioned consistently with other mailboxes in the neighborhood and within the specifications of the HOA covenant. Following the incident, the HOA president engaged in what appears to be retaliatory enforcement against the homeowner who requested compensation. This is not a close case. She looked at Barbara's attorney. Does the HOA have any actual evidence that the mailbox was improperly positioned or that the contractor was not at fault? The attorney shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, we maintain that the positioning created an unavoidable hazard. Except that in 8 years of operating in this neighborhood, the contractor has not hit any of the other identically positioned mailboxes, Judge Kowalski said. That suggests this was not unavoidable. It suggests this was negligent operation of the vehicle. She made some notes on her papers. I'm ruling in favor of Mr. Reynolds. The HOA is ordered to pay $312 for mailbox replacement costs, plus court filing fees of $75, plus $50 for Mr. Reynolds's time and expenses in bringing this action. Total judgment of $437, payable within 30 days. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but Judge Kowalski was not done. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to rescind all violation notices issued to Mr. Reynolds after February 15th of this year. The pattern of enforcement is clearly retaliatory and constitutes harassment. If the HOA wishes to enforce these particular standards, they must do so consistently across all properties, not selectively against a homeowner engaged in a dispute. Barbara's face had gone from red to white. She looked like she wanted to argue but could not find words. "Finally," Judge Kowalski said, her tone hardening, "I want to be clear about something. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining neighborhoods, but they are not above the law. Homeowners have rights, and HOA boards cannot use their position to bully or retaliate against residents who exercise those rights. If I see another case come through this courtroom involving this HOA and retaliatory enforcement, I will not be pleased. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Honor," Barbara's attorney said quickly. "Good. Court is adjourned." As we filed out of the courtroom, Barbara pushed past me without making eye contact. Deborah and Linda followed her, both looking shell-shocked. David shook my hand. That went about as well as it could have possibly gone. Judge Kowalski does not like bullies, and she saw right through what Barbara was doing. "So this is over?" I asked. "This case is over. Whether Barbara accepts defeat gracefully remains to be seen." I called Frank from the parking lot to give him the news. He whooped so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I'm telling everyone," Frank said gleefully. "This is the best news this neighborhood has had in years." Word spread quickly through Meadowbrook Estates. By that evening, I had received text messages, emails, and even a few handwritten notes from neighbors congratulating me and thanking me for standing up to Barbara. Jennifer brought over a bottle of wine to celebrate. "You actually did it," she said, grinning. "You beat the HOA." "We did it," I corrected. "Without your video evidence, I never would have won." "True," she agreed. "But you're the one who had the guts to fight when most people would have just paid up and moved on." For a few days, things were quiet. I half expected Barbara to find some new way to retaliate, but my mailbox remained unmolested and no new violation notices appeared. Then, 2 weeks after the court hearing, I received a letter from an attorney named Michelle Bradford. This was not Hutchins and Brock. This was a different firm, and the letter was addressed not just to me but to all homeowners of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. The letter explained that Michelle represented a group of 12 homeowners who were filing a formal petition to remove Barbara Henderson, Deborah Winters, and Linda Carmichael from the HOA board for mismanagement, abuse of authority, and breach of fiduciary duty. The letter cited multiple examples of selective enforcement, inappropriate fines, and failure to maintain proper financial controls. It requested that all homeowners review the attached documentation and consider signing the petition, which required 20% of homeowners to force a special election for the board. I read through the attached documents with growing amazement. The other homeowners had documented everything. The couple fined for having the wrong shade of beige shutters, Tom and Rachel's issues with garden decorations, a family threatened with fines for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, someone cited for having outdoor Christmas lights up 2 days past the arbitrary deadline Barbara had set. On and on it went, page after page of petty tyranny. There were also financial irregularities. The HOA had paid Clearway Snow Services almost 40% more than the previous contractor without getting competitive bids. Barbara had approved payment to a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law. The HOA had spent $8,000 on legal fees in the past year, mostly related to threatening homeowners over minor disputes. I called the number on Michelle Bradford's letter and reached her secretary, who transferred me through. "Mr. Reynolds," Michelle said warmly, "I was hoping you'd call. Your case against the HOA was what finally convinced several other homeowners that something needed to be done." I had no idea things were this bad, I admitted. Barbara has been operating the HOA like her personal kingdom for years. Most people were too intimidated to speak up, or they tried individually and got crushed. But when you won in court and Judge Kowalski called out the retaliatory enforcement, that gave others courage. We're up to 27 signatures on the petition already. We only need 32 total for the special election. What can I do to help? Honestly, just keep being visible and telling your story. You're proof that standing up to them works. That's powerful. The petition reached the required number of signatures within another week. Barbara tried to challenge the validity of several signatures, claiming they were forged or improperly obtained. But Michelle shot that down with documented proof of each signature's authenticity. The special election was scheduled for June 15th, giving candidates exactly 4 weeks to campaign. Michelle had organized a slate of 3 candidates to run against Barbara, Deborah, and Linda. Herself, a retired accountant named Richard Paulson who had experience with nonprofit financial management, and a younger woman named Amanda Torres who worked as a civil engineer and had strong ideas about proper maintenance and planning. Barbara fought back hard. She sent out multiple mailings attacking the challengers, claiming they wanted to eliminate all standards and turn Meadowbrook Estates into a slum. She held a meeting at the clubhouse, where she brought in the attorney from Hutchins and Brock to warn about the dangers of inexperienced board members. She went door-to-door campaigning and telling anyone who would listen that the petition was organized by troublemakers who did not respect property values. But the tide had turned. Too many people had been harassed, fined inappropriately, or intimidated. The stories came pouring out once people realized they were not alone. Frank became an unofficial campaign manager for the challengers, organizing coffee meetings where homeowners could meet Michelle, Richard, and Amanda. Jennifer created a website with detailed information about HOA finances and the proposed changes. Tom and Rachel hosted a barbecue that turned into an impromptu campaign rally with over 50 people attending. I kept a lower profile, knowing that Barbara would use me as a lightning rod if I was too visible. But I talked to anyone who asked, explaining what had happened with my mailbox and how the court had ruled. Election day arrived on a beautiful June evening. The voting took place at the clubhouse from 6 to 8 p.m. Turnout was massive. Out of 147 homes in Meadowbrook Estates, over 100 homeowners showed up to vote. The votes were counted by hand with representatives from both sides watching. It was not even close. Michelle Bradford received 93 votes. Richard Paulson received 91 votes. Amanda Torres received 87 votes. Barbara Henderson received 42 votes. Deborah Winters received 38 votes. Linda Carmichael received 36 votes. It was a complete repudiation. Barbara stood in the corner of the clubhouse, her face frozen in shock as the results were announced. Deborah was crying. Linda had already left. Michelle gave a gracious acceptance speech, thanking everyone for their trust and promising to run the HOA transparently and fairly. "We're going to focus on the things that actually matter," she said. "Maintaining our common areas, keeping our streets safe and plowed, and leaving people alone to enjoy their homes in peace." The applause was thunderous. The new board was seated officially on July 1st. One of their first actions was to commission an independent audit of the HOA's finances. The audit revealed what Michelle had suspected. Barbara had been overpaying contractors with connections to her family and friends, steering business to people who gave her kickbacks. The overpayment to Clearway Snow Services alone totaled over $15,000 across 3 years. Michelle turned the audit results over to the Brown County District Attorney's Office. After a 3-month investigation, criminal charges were filed against Barbara Henderson in October. The charges included theft by fraud, misconduct in public office, and 3 counts of accepting kickbacks. The amounts were not huge in the grand scheme of things, but they were enough for felony charges. Barbara was arrested at her home on a Friday morning. The local news covered it, including the detail about how the investigation had begun following a dispute over a damaged mailbox. Barbara's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of theft by fraud and 1 count of misconduct in public office. The other charges were dropped. She received 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution to the HOA totaling $18,000. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Wisconsin. Deborah and Linda were not charged criminally, but they were named in a civil suit by the HOA to recover some of the misappropriated funds. That case was still pending as of last I heard. The new board under Michelle's leadership was like night and day. They published financial statements online every month. They got competitive bids for all contracts and saved the HOA almost $30,000 annually through proper procurement. They revised the covenant enforcement policy to focus on genuine issues affecting property values, not petty nonsense. Brown patches on lawns were not violations. Garbage cans visible for a few hours were not violations. Cars parked at slight angles were not violations. The neighborhood relaxed. People started actually enjoying living in Meadowbrook Estates again. The summer block party in August had the biggest turnout in years. I became friendly with several neighbors I had barely known before all this started. Jennifer and I discovered a shared love of classic movies and started a monthly movie night. Frank and Margaret had me over for dinner regularly. Tom and Rachel and I formed a team for the neighborhood cornhole tournament, which we lost badly but had fun anyway. My mailbox, the one that had started everything, stood proudly at the end of my driveway with its brushed nickel accents gleaming in the sun. Nobody ever questioned whether it was in compliance with HOA standards. On a cold evening in November, almost 9 months after the plow had struck my mailbox, I was bringing in my garbage cans when a car pulled up. It was Michelle. "Hey, Brian," she said, rolling down her window. "Got a minute?" "Sure," I said, walking over. "The board wanted me to thank you officially," Michelle said. "If you had not fought back when Barbara tried to bully you over that mailbox, none of this would have happened. You started something important." "I just wanted someone to take responsibility for breaking my mailbox," I said, feeling a bit embarrassed. "And because you stood your ground, we discovered years of corruption and mismanagement. Dozens of homeowners are not being harassed anymore. The HOA is running properly. That matters." She handed me an envelope. "The board voted to reimburse you for your legal fees from the small claims case. It's not everything, but it's something." I opened the envelope and found a check for $1,000, the full amount I had paid David Park. "You did not have to do this," I said. "We wanted to," Michelle said simply. "You took a risk standing up for what was right. The least we can do is make sure you are not out of pocket for it." After she drove away, I stood in my driveway holding the check and looking at my mailbox. It was just a mailbox, black metal with brushed nickel accents, mounted on a pressure-treated post. But it had become a symbol of something larger. A line in the sand that said bullies do not always win, that standing up for yourself matters, that communities can change when people refuse to accept abuse from those in authority. A snowflake landed on my hand, the first of the winter. I smiled, thinking about how different this winter would be from the last. The same company would probably plow our streets, but there would be accountability now. If they damaged something, they would take responsibility for it like they should have done in the first place. I went inside where it was warm, made myself some coffee, and settled in to watch the evening news. Life in Meadowbrook Estates was good. The HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas, managing shared services, and otherwise staying out of people's way. Barbara Henderson was facing the consequences of her corruption. The neighbors had come together and taken back their community. And it had all started because a plow truck had hit my mailbox on a cold February morning, and instead of accepting blame for something that was not my fault, I had decided to fight back. Sometimes the smallest battles lead to the biggest victories. Sometimes standing up for yourself over something as simple as a $300 mailbox can expose years of abuse and change an entire community for the better. Sometimes refusing to be bullied matters more than you could ever imagine when you first decide to take that stand. My mailbox was still standing, and so was I, and that made all the difference.